Having survived the Mirror Lake, you move into the next room of the Doomvault, but find yourself stuck between a rock and a hard place. In Osric's gate, you enter into this small room but are faced with this magical barrier that's preventing your advance forward, but also you're dealing with the pressure of the what were once men and the Invincibles in pursuit behind you. You only have a limited amount of time before you're completely trapped in this small space, and so you have to work quickly and discover the password or find some way to continue forward, or else you'll be completely overwhelmed. In this discussion of the Doomvault, the Osric's Gate is actually something that's only included in the core version of the Doomvault. In the Mega Dungeon version, you have a completely different encounter, which I'll touch on briefly later on, but we're going to be focusing a lot of our time here in the core edition, because as well, you'll have noticed up until this point we have not dealt with any actual Ogdru cultists, which the whole point of this dungeon is it's a cult dungeon. And so at this point we can start really discussing the Ogdru cult properly. So let's jump over to our map as usual. As you can see, we've moved from the Mirror Lake into this small little room here, and readily apparent is the magical barrier. That's the thing that draws our attention. Based off the description in the Doomvault bullets, Osric's Gate is there's a purplish energy hovers over this gateway, barring passage. Only by reciting the passwords written on the adjacent wall may it be moved through. It's a 2-heart translation. The swimming men give chase from the lake. Some enemies carry a codex which aids reading, and exit to the sleeping chamber is unbarred. Okay, so based off this map, we've got some details here, but what I keep in mind that we're adding this variety in. The Mirror Lake was a very combat driven encounter. You're trying to accomplish skill challenges, address a lot of different threats. But in the Osric's Gate, we are taking a step away from some of those pressures, adding the variety in by making this more of an effort challenge. And this is where I think ICRPG really starts to shine, and where you can see the power of timers and effort. So in this particular room here, let's say, for example, it's a little calmer. So instead of a target 12, we're going to drop it back down to 10. We've been kind of fluctuating between 10 and 12 so far. So we've got a target of 10. Our players can move in pretty freely as they rush in and kind of come to terms with what's ahead. They may have a free open room, or depending, you could also include some kind of monk here in advance, or what I would say is after they get their wits about them, you could potentially have an Ogdru cultist kind of enter the room midway to add some dynamics and disruption as they move in from the other side of the chamber. But the basic premise is that once they're in this room, they are dealing with a 2-heart challenge, so 20 points of effort need to be kind of put on deciphering this, these runes on the wall. And so this is where you can now have some of your more intelligent characters come to shine. The ones that have intelligence, they've put in some tools and effort. They've put in some basic effort there to deciphering how this goes down. So this is a 2-heart translation. So immediately once they start going through, you can't bust your way through this. You have to find out the password. It's powerful magic. Our sorcerer or our scholar can go up to the runes and they can start deciphering it. I would make this an intelligence or a wisdom roll to understand the runes there. And then once they successfully passed a check, I would move into just basic attempts so that they make a successful intelligence or wisdom roll to begin the process, but once they've started, it's just effort rolls over and over. And I would stick to either basic, if they don't have any tools to help them whatsoever other than their mind, or tools, which would then bump it up to a D6. But they would need something specific that a player could potentially pitch to say, hey, this is a tool that I have that could help me in deciphering. Now, what we're going to go through here is the timers, the threats, and the treats real quick as we've kind of set the premise going on here. But timer-wise, what I would have is, as before, we've got a couple timers going on. We've got a 2 timer or a timer of 2. I just rolled a d4 timer of perhaps the Invincibles showing up. Okay, we've been keeping them up and going for most of the time. If you're really kind of hesitant on having the Invincibles entering in too early, what I would potentially say is either just set that at like a 4. So instead of rolling for a d4, you could always set this as just a flat out 4. I wouldn't go too much higher than a 4 because you will be able to get through this room, ideally fairly quickly. I mean, you do want that time pressure, and anything more than 4 rounds is really kind of long in ICRPG games. I know it sounds like it won't be enough time with the 20 heart effort challenge with the deciphering of the password, but trust me, like it's a fine balance. 20 is really pushing it. You are pushing the limits there, but again, you don't want it to go on too long because 6 rounds in this room will just feel like an eternity. Additionally, what you could do is then, once you've set a 4 or something like a 4 or 5 in that for the Invincibles, you could then roll for the number of rounds before the What Were Once Men are coming. And so these What Were Once Men are braving, they've seen someone make it past their chamber, they're diving deeper in, they are part of the cultists a little bit, they're just more corrupted, and so these guys are going to be rushing in. So you can roll a d4 and hopefully you can get another 4, or maybe you can get, you end up with a 1. But these What Were Once Men are going to come in, and they're going to be coming in like every round with like a d4. So after these initial 2 rounds, I would have d4 showing up every round until the Invincibles come in as well, and then it's just going to become like this pressuring squeeze as they rush to finish this effort challenge. So those are our timers. Our threats here are the impending monsters that are coming in. You've got a threat here of the barrier, but then you can also include the Ogdru monks that are going to come in. And these guys can kind of interrupt the timers. They can be something that you could pop in, just like one of them, to keep things busy, because as the one player is focusing on deciphering, the other players may not have anything to do. And so if you notice that the other players aren't really there to help, or they don't have anything to kind of keep themselves busy, and they're almost being a little passive at the moment, you could pull in an Ogdru monk to kind of keep their attention on something and keep their focus on the monk, so that the adventurer of the scholar can keep doing his work. Now, the last thing is the treat, and this is another reason why you might want to drop in a monk either in the room when they walk in, or they halfway through. Is if the monk is here, you can include 2 different kinds of treats. One, you can include, like it said, a codex, something that could elevate the efforts to helping out with this deciphering. If they've already got a really good bonus on tools, if they've already got something helpful, what you could do is you could have a codex that ups it to ultimate, which could be really helpful to really speed things up, especially as time is going on. So that codex could be really helpful, and that's not something that I would roll for. Like, once these your characters dispatch one of the cultists, you just say, on his person you find a codex, an interesting book, and it looks like the runes match the runes on the wall. Quick, hand it to the let them kind of hand it off to the scholar or the wizard or whoever is deciphering it, and say, you now get ultimate effort on deciphering Ogdru runes, and go from there. So that could be a good boon, either bumping it from basic to tools, or from tools to ultimate if you need. The other thing that you could do, and this is something in preparation for later on, is you could include some kind of amulet, Ogdru amulet, something very specific to the cultists. This may help be a treat that you drop in here that's going to help out in a later room, specifically the Guardians, which we're going to get to in a future video. But having those in mind is, I find that having treats that can play into encounters later on are a great way to tie in your sessions, or tie in your encounters from scene to scene. And so knowing what's ahead, you could potentially find a great opportunity to drop in a treat here. But what are the cultists? Let's talk about them for a second, because what we're finding is that in the adventure itself, let me pull back here for a second. In the adventure itself, there is no monster set. There's no like monster block for Ogdru monks. You actually have a page here that's discussing how they've left it open-ended for you to decide what you want your Ogdru monks to be. For example, it says whatever you need. There's no monster monk page. You can make them lowly 1 HP humans, or you can make them magic users. You can make them inhuman. You can make them blank-eyed children. Do whatever makes sense for you. This is going to be something that you can escalate up or down depending on your needs. On this page as well, whatever you do decide, you get to, they include some things that an Ogdru monk might say, like, interlopers here, impossible, or I see it in your lies, greed worshippers, be gone from this sacred place. Or all are welcome here, wretch, read you these walls and join the black sheep. And so, depending on what you do, this particular page can really help give you some feedback, some things that you might want to say for the monks. But if you are looking for a stat block for the Ogdru monks, I really like going to the Hekun Dawn. They are a monster in the Hekun Carapace adventure, included in the free ICRPG adventure pack. These guys are a great template for cultists, in my opinion. They have 1 heart. They are a +2 to their rolls, and then they've got 6 actions that you just roll randomly for. Things like a dagger, typical weapon attack. Darts, they hurl steely darts from at range. They're a mob. The hooded figures leap forward, grabbing a foe with strength and simply pinning them, mumbling and chanting about one of us. This would be an action where they don't roll for it. They roll strength, or the player rolls a strength save, depending on how you want to do it. They have hypnotize. They remove their hood, and they have their semi-insectoid face. You could make it into a tentacly, Cthulhu-esque face instead of an insectoid. But those looking must make a whiz roll or a whiz save or be transfixed for 1 round. If they are transfixed for 3 rounds, a victim is hypnotized and works for the cult until finding a way to snap out of it. So this would just be, making whiz saves each round, or someone like slapping them across the face. They hide. This is no army. The cultists run off and cower. Martyr, 1 hooded figure hurls itself at enemies, fire, weakening structures, or the like to cause harm. And so the Hekun Dawn is a great template for cultists, and something that I usually pull on when I do need my Ogdru monks to have something a little bit more set in stone, but I do have that flexibility to tweak and make them even more powerful or less powerful, depending. So how this scene usually plays out is that your characters rush in, and whether you have a monk or not in the room, what I would say is that these adventurers are pretty astute with, dungeon security or whatever. So rather than having for them to decipher or learn about exactly what the objective of the room is, you can let them figure it out just automatically. Just tell them. For example, you could have them rush in as a monk is finishing up his reading of the wall and saying the password, and you see him walk in, and so they can clue in that, hey, there's a password, but they didn't quite catch the wording. But it looks like they were reading off the wall, but you just have to decipher the runes. Or you can just have someone just blatantly know, hey, this looks like an inscription that's connected. The magical energies are tied between this wall and this portal. They must be connected. So if I read this, perhaps we'll find a password or something to clue in. And then you tell them it's a 20-heart effort to translate and find the password way past. And then if there is a monk, you can give them an opportunity to fight, give some introduction, let them have some role play there. They run off, or others join them as they come in, and perhaps over time they can discover that codex, that amulet that's come into play later. Or once they've dealt with the Ogdru monks, because the monks may or may not be mooks or whatever, what were once men are going to start flowing in, and characters could either set up like a more defensive position after dealing with them. So you have like this rogue here who's dealing with any monks that come through the passage, or maybe they're helping with the translation. You've got your tanks, your beefy fighters who are standing on guard. They're creating a bit of a choke point. And as the what were once men were flowing in, perhaps you give them an easy attack on their, coming an easy on their rolls for attack, or maybe you boost their defense a little bit as they move in. And so you can use some of the tactics and positioning there to give some bonuses and extra treats as they know, perhaps, hey, these what were once men are spawning out of this lake. They're coming. We've got to hurry. We've got to hurry. We're being overwhelmed here, and they can spot in the distance these invincibles trudging towards them. At this point, if you are feeling a little bit hamstringed with the threat of the invincibles, like you feel like it's a little too much and you want to de-escalate the situation a little bit, you could perhaps drop one of the invincibles, because now these two invincibles are, have left their guard. So one invincible goes back up and continues to guard the long pattern, and one invincible does kind of stay focused on the intruders. And so if you want to de-escalate the invincibles at this point, you've kind of hit the halfway point with it. And so you could de-escalate it down to just one invincible, which is still a pretty big threat. Other things that you might want to keep in mind with this is that there is a mechanics page that introduces some mechanics that you could introduce for different situations. For example, the invincibles, like at the point if any time the entire group is defeated by invincibles, they are cast onto Hag's Roost and roll a 1d6 each. On a 1, they fall from the roost, scrabbling down the wet cliffside towards the surf. So if you ever do have a total party wipe, rather than just saying it's a TPK, we're all dead, the invincibles walk in and just drag the whole party back to Hag's Roost, and essentially gives the characters an opportunity to go again if they want to still face the challenge of getting down into the ritual before it goes off, or if they're like, hey, heck no, they can leave, and then you have to deal with, they just accept the consequences of the adventure. But the invincibles do provide a way to avoid just a flat out TPK. It's a party wipe there. At this point, you would want to start having rogue figures spawning more often. In each area spawn 1d6 Ogdru monks every 1d4 rounds, so you could include that as a timer, or you can play by ear. You could also start having the gathering, which says have a player count how many total rounds pass until the heroes reach the pit. That's near the end of the adventure. And then that's the number of monks that are going to be present at the pit. So you could, at this point that they've now entered into the more refined portion of the dungeon, start having them count, and then if you want to have a determined number, if they go faster, less monks are there. If they go slower, more monks. Total optional mechanic there. The other thing that you want to have, or you could have, is there's this idea of, as you're deciphering the translation, you could have them track dark visions, as it's called. If the value goes above 4, consider them charmed by Ogdru, and the heroes will start to believe the ritual must be completed. Either, if you wanted to include that mechanic, you would have ritual or inscriptions carved throughout the cave that they would explore. I find that kind of slows things down, because you're giving too many things for them to kind of focus on and just roll. You get a little bit more information. That's kind of stuff that I would drop in naturally. Rather, otherwise, at this point, when they're doing the inscription, if they fail a roll as they inscribe it, I'd potentially add 1 to their dark visions. Or if they ever, after they succeed the first time, if they ever roll a 1 effort, then I would have them add a point of dark vision. And once they're charmed by the Ogdru, you can just play this out as a belief, and players can rely on their role playing to kind of tune this in. It's not that they're completely charmed and they're taking over and that they're going to betray everyone for the Ogdru. It's that you can start having them start believing that this is what it is, and it can play into some choices there over time, and they'll start to believe that ritual must be completed. So it could sway things, and if they go against it, you could potentially have them roll some hard rolls, make it a little bit tougher to throw off the sway of the Ogdru influence. But those are just some ideas for some basic mechanics. Now, really quickly, I do want to touch on the version of the Mega Dungeon and what's there instead of the Osric's Gate. And essentially, this is the idea that if you're looking at the big dungeon map presented in the Mega Dungeon version, rather than Osric's Gate, you have the Shattered Stairs. And I've included these a couple times, but this room can get a little intense, and this is one of the rooms that in the past I have nerfed when perhaps I shouldn't have. And as I've noticed that because I nerf it doesn't end up having as much of an impact on the game, and so it's more of a time waster. And so you do want to be aware of that when some things do seem intense, especially here like in a Mega Dungeon version. Like if you do nerf it, the result can be a bit of a letdown. So in this particular room, you have the Shattered Stairs, the Ooze River, that's the waterfall cascading down into the depths. It's a centerpiece for a colossal set of ancient stairs. The stairway has missing section and is built far beyond human scale, each step as tall as a grown man. This is a huge vertical area and is a perilous descent. You include at least 3 huge gaps in the stairs, and you can see those are presented, here, here, and here. So the timer for this room is that every D4 round, the stairs shift or crumble, you roll dex or hang by a finger. And so this is rolling dex to either stay standing or you hang by a finger, which if we recall is you fall down hanging there. And when you're hanging by a finger instead of hanging by a hand, someone else has to make a strength or dexterity roll to pull you back up. If you're hanging by a hand, you can attempt those rolls, but once you're hanging by a finger, you also roll a d4 like a dying timer, and it's now a falling timer. So after that timer passes, you fall. And in this case, you would probably fall down a level and take some damage. Or if it's like a really bad roll or whatever, it would be down to your doom. And so it's kind of like a dying timer. And this is, I find, a really good way to handle falling, because we all know that if you just fail a check and then you fall to your death, it's really kind of lame. But I really like the hanging by a hand and hanging by a finger mechanics, because it really plays into dying timers, which we're all pretty cool with. The threats is 4 flaming skulls patrol the Ooze River Falls, flying up and down in a helix pattern. Now, flaming skulls are intense, and I think this is what's always thrown me off, is you've got 4 flaming skulls, and these guys are a little beastly. Before I get into their stat block, the last thing is a treat, is a treasure chest. And you can have that down at the bottom and include some ancient loot. So you do give some bonuses there at the bottom. But really quickly on the flaming skulls, these flaming skulls have 2 hearts each. They roll +2 to their stats and +4 on their magic effort. Their actions include levitate. They can move anywhere. They're flying up to a far height. They have paralyze. They can make a single target stuck motionless without making a hard intelligence check. Paralysis lasts 4 rounds or until the check is made. They have a fire sword. On its turn, they can conjure a blazing sword, which will engage combat on its own. The sword is spectral and cannot be harmed. Fights with normal attempts and weapon effort and vanishes only when the skull is killed or flees. And then they have magma bomb. Spit a blob of molten fire at a target or area. Anything near the impact site for the next 4 rounds must make a dex check or take fire damage, magical fire damage, and the successful check results in half. These things are intense. Having 4 of them in a scene can really tie things up, especially as you're trying to make dex challenges. Again, I have not usually included these guys because I get a little too afraid of dropping them into this dex challenge room. But I find that without some kind of enemy here, and even if you just want to drop this down to 2 and have the other 2 on patrol somewhere else, try to include something in this room if you are running the Shattered Stairs, just because otherwise it does feel like a wasted room. I've seen too often that because I don't properly approach I don't properly address the scale, and that's a misstep on Wonder on my part, as well as I don't have some kind of enemy. I have seen more people than I would think just completely drop to the bottom and just take a couple points of damage. They're just totally fine. We're just going to jump. Awesome. Again, like without the wonder, without the scale, without the enemies and the threats, certain scenes can really fall flat. And so you got to kind of lean into some of the stressful, like, is this too much? Yes, it may be too much, but otherwise you do end up with a bit of a flat room. But yeah, this scene overall would be, you know, really easy to kind of include. And again, it's that variety, it's that change from combat, high focus challenge, you know, there to some effort and feeling time a lot more, rather than just flat out like death or being pulled across. You just simply have to put a card somewhere for the gate, something that they have to include for translating, have a timer die out on the table, and then you can use the things like Hekun Carapace and other stuff to incorporate those other details. Having the Ogdru cultists start showing up a lot more lets you really start leaning into that cultist vibe as you get closer. You get to start hearing drums. You change from a cavern into a dungeon, and this is a really good transitionary scene that you can lean into and start including a lot more. But what do you think? How have you run the Osric's Gate? I would love to hear your stories, and if you are still catching up, you can watch plenty of the other videos there. The live playthrough is also available. But we're continuing on our Doomvault, and we'll look forward to the next video. Thanks, everybody.